Hi, Crime Junkies. I'm your host, Ashley Flowers.
And I'm Brit.
And I have a story that is going to stay with you. And be warned, it is not for the faint of heart. What was done to the victim and how she was found is truly one of the most haunting images that I've had to convey in over 600 cases, I think. But I'm going to walk you through it all. From the night of the murder on Valentine's Day 2007 to the brand new forensic techniques used to identify the killer, and ultimately to the chilling realization that our suspect was leading a double life. On one hand, he was moving about the world like you and I, acting out the part of father, partner, and friend. He lived and worked in the very town where he also took the role of monster, a man who set up a crime scene in a way that allowed him to watch as he desecrated the corpse of a young woman he'd killed in her own apartment. This is the story of Jody and Serrin. It's Valentine's Day 2007, and even after 53 years of marriage, Art and Lois Serrin don't skip out on a chance for a romantic date night of dinner and a movie to celebrate. They try to plan a day just for themselves because, like many parents, decades of their lives have been consumed with taking care of their 6 kids. And even more so for them because their 39-year-old daughter, Jodine, who goes by Jody, she had developmental disabilities that we're told gave her the mental capacity of a girl in her early teens. And Jody lived on her own, but in many ways she was still dependent on her parents. They checked in on her every day. They helped her get from place to place because she didn't drive. But on this day, they hadn't been able to get a hold of her. 72-year-old Lois tried pushing it out of her mind, like just one day where she and her husband could just focus on themselves. It wouldn't be the end of the world. But all through dinner, it was like nagging at her. And as she sat in the dark of the movie theater, she just couldn't focus on the screen. With every scene change, she just grew more and more anxious till she couldn't take it anymore. Like, what's the point of being there if she can't actually enjoy it? Whatever feeling was crawling under her skin, she just had to give in. So mid-movie, she and Art leave the theater. It's around 10 p.m. when the Serrins get to Jody's condo. At first, they knock and wait, expecting to hear their daughter's footsteps, see the knob turn. But there's nothing. So Art pulls out his spare key, unlocks the door, and tries to push it open. But it barely budges. The chain is latched from the inside. And this stops them cold because Jody never chains her door. And now the Serrins are starting to panic. So at 77 years old, Art throws himself against the door and breaks it down. Now the lights are on inside the condo and the Serrins head straight for their daughter's bedroom. Art opens the door, and even though the room is dark, in the shadows he sees 2 people in bed. It looks like Jody with a man, and it looks like they're having sex. And he's obviously taken aback, probably a little embarrassed, probably mad at whoever this man is. So he quickly shuts the door and calls out. It's basically like, listen, you need to get decent. You both need to come out to the living room. We are going to be here waiting for you. And honestly, I would probably be stewing a little bit. But a few minutes go by, and then some more, and no one comes out to join Art and Lois in the living room. Not even Jody. So I don't know if it's stewing as much as it is just like, something's wrong. Like they're getting curious. Something's going on. So Art gets up to check again, just to nudge the 2 along. But this is when everything shifts. Not just his perception of things, but it's like Art's whole world flips on its axis in this moment, and forever his life is going to be changed. When he opens the door, the man isn't in Jody's room anymore. It is just his daughter, laying naked and lifeless on the bed, covered in blood. She's not breathing. She's actually cold to the touch, all of which Art tells to a 911 operator in a frantic call. Based on their recommendation, he moves Jody from the bed to the floor to begin CPR, but there is no saving her. And when first responders get to the scene, it is, quote, immediately clear to them that Jody is dead. And given the state of her body, she has likely been dead for several hours, way before the Serrins even got to her condo.
So it's not like Art could have stopped anything.
No, the medical examiner will end up determining that Jody died around noon that day, so almost 10 hours before they got there, which I imagine has to be some relief. Like, I mean, to even for a moment think that you were just sitting feet away as someone killed your daughter would be mental torture. But then, like, there's that relief for a second, but you also then have to reconcile what it was you actually walked in on,
Right.
which was this man desecrating Jody's corpse. And in that moment, I don't know how much relief there is in that.
Yeah. And they were all in the apartment, like, at the same time.
Yeah.
Did this guy escape through a window or something?
No, so the way that Jody's condo is laid out, it's kind of split down the middle by a dividing wall. So when you walk in the front door, you can either turn one way and go to the bedroom, or you can turn the other way and get to the kitchen and living room.
Oh.
So with the Serrins sitting in the living room, this guy could run right out of the front door without them actually even knowing. And investigators used bloodhounds to track the man's scent from the condo, out the front door, down Jody Street, all the way to a main road where he'd tossed his sweatshirt into a bush. But then that's where the scent stops. Their man is long gone, but he did leave plenty behind at the scene, and not just physical evidence. There is evidence of how devious and methodical this man was. I mean, it is clear that he took his time setting up this crime scene in exactly the way he wanted. Sheets and blankets had been placed over the windows in Jody's room, and a full-length mirror was moved next to the bed so this guy could see what it was he was doing to Jody. He had beaten her over the head, strangled her, but she must have fought back because she had defensive wounds and bruising all over. And along with sexually assaulting her corpse, the man also inflicted at least one cut, a laceration across her throat that likely happened post-mortem. This guy clearly had a plan around what he was doing to Jody, but her parents busting her front door down was obviously not part of the plan. And in his hurry to leave, he made some mistakes. First of all, there is blood all over Jody's room and in the bathroom, on the walls, the carpet, the linens. I mean, it's everywhere, as is his DNA and tons of partial fingerprints. And in his rush to sneak out without being seen by Jody's parents, he'd even left his sneakers behind. And these sneakers actually end up being a major clue because they weren't just like kicked off randomly. They had been taken off and neatly placed next to the rest of Jody's shoes by the front door, which is where Jody always instructed her guests to remove and place their shoes before coming inside. Like, Jody was like super neat and tidy, especially when it came to her place. So this tells investigators that whoever killed Jody must have been invited in. Aside from Art's own work on the condo door, there were no signs of forced entry to Jody's place. And there were even dishes for two in the sink, which made it seem like things had started out friendly with whoever this person was before they took an unthinkable turn.
Well, and it is like Valentine's Day, like dishes for two seems kind of like a date.
Date-ish, but whatever this started off as, like, given the state of the condo and the story that the evidence told, it seemed like almost in an instant, things switched from good to bad. The change from neatly arranged shoes and dishes placed in the sink to rage-filled violence in the bedroom suggested to detectives very early on that drug use may have been a part of the picture. But it would only have been on the part of the offender, because Jody's parents were clear she did not use drugs, and her autopsy would later confirm that.
No, I know it was dark and, like, obviously traumatic on multiple levels, but was Art able to see what this guy looked like at all when he first saw him in Jody's bedroom?
So in initial interviews, he actually claims to have gotten a good look at the suspect, like enough to say that he was 5'8" to 6 feet tall, a little chubby. And I think his brain was trying to fill in the gaps because early on, he was even convinced that it was someone Jody knew, someone specific named Robert Burns. This was a guy that had similar developmental disabilities as Jody. They used to have some sort of relationship at some point, which would have put them together maybe on Valentine's Day. But investigators quickly rule Robert out because of his alibi, and they would later confirm it definitely wasn't him because his DNA did not match what was left at the crime scene. And with him ruled out, then all they've got is like a description of a kind of chubby guy who's about 6 feet tall.
Well, and like you said, like all this DNA.
And that, but any hopes of a quick slam dunk get crushed because even though they had the DNA and DNA that's good enough to go into the state and national databases, this dude is a ghost. He's not in any database because like this is a case where we don't have a lot of these where it's like, 2007, you can put it in. The database is there. The database is populated. People know how it works. And still, he doesn't exist.
Which seems bonkers to
I know.
me because of how, like you said, methodical this was. It
Brazen.
doesn't feel like a first time. Like, how?
It's a shock to everyone. I mean, the only thing I think they assume is that, like, whatever this guy has done, he just hasn't gotten caught for it. Because nothing about this, like you said, is giving, like, first-time offender.
Yeah.
But also, like, I kept thinking, I wonder what the crime scene would have looked like had this man not been interrupted. Was he planning on cleaning up? Would he have even left Jody there? Like, we usually talk about MO based on what's been left behind.
But maybe he wouldn't have left anything behind if he had had enough time.
Exactly. Jody's dad could have completely changed the trajectory of things. Like, dude didn't even have time to put on his shoes. So what else did he not have time to do? So they've got to find someone who's not in a database, who Jody either knew or recently met and would willingly let into her home. They start by building out the timeline of her last known movements. The last confirmed contact Jody had with anyone was a phone call with her mom on the 13th, so just the day before. And she'd actually told her mom on the phone that she was planning to go to a Valentine's Day party on the 14th. But we know she never made it to that party. There were several voicemails from people wondering where she was.
Do they think that she met up with this guy on the 14th? Or, I mean, is it possible that he was actually there on the 13th? Like, her time of death is noon on the 14th, but, I mean, I have to wonder how long they were together before that happened.
Yeah, that's the big question. When did she meet him and where? Now, interestingly, they come to learn that while Jody didn't have a full-time job, she was very involved in volunteer work. She would help out at nursing homes or facilities for people with similar developmental disabilities. And one of the facilities that she would go to was co-located with a substance abuse treatment place, which, considering their early theory that the offender was on drugs, they begin to wonder if maybe she crossed paths with someone around there. And not even necessarily that day, because she wasn't volunteering on the 14th.
Right, but maybe someone saw her, had been following her, had had some contact before.
Yeah, or even just like ran into her another time, and then on this day was like, yeah, hey, remember me, whatever. Because the other thing about Jody, she was trusting, very overly, people say, trusting of strangers. I mean, she was the kind of person who saw everyone as a friend and was so innocent in her thinking. So detectives actually hear that Jody would have let anybody into her home.
Which makes those like neatly placed shoes and dishes a little less like they mean less, right?
Right. It just had to be, in my mind, someone that was like nice to her, right, to start out.
Yeah.
But we know that switch from good to bad happened really quick. And knowing this now makes narrowing down a suspect pool early on nearly impossible. So detectives spend the first weeks of their investigation making a Hail Mary list of anyone and everyone who could possibly be responsible. People in the area, people Jody was associated with or might have crossed paths with, people they're tipped off to. I mean, there are over 50 men on this list, and they go out and knock on all these guys' doors. They swab every single one of them and send each and every swab to the lab for comparison. But there are no matches. And when they reach the bottom of their list, there really aren't any other obvious directions for investigators to go in. By this point, the case has been highly publicized as the, quote, Valentine's Day murder. Tips are coming in by the hundreds, but like nothing is panning out. So at one point, detectives even reach out to the VDOC Society. And that's a group of retired like detectives, FBI agents, forensic experts. Like basically they bring together anyone who's like an expert in their field. They're located in Pennsylvania, and they take on some of the coldest, most baffling murder cases that no one else can crack. They'll like come in and consult for you. You have to present your case or whatever. But even they don't have a magic wand. I mean, they can suggest what type of offender this guy is, maybe confirm that some of the theories police had are probably right. But they can't make this guy materialize.
And it's so much more frustrating when you have all this DNA on file.
I know.
And like I want to say no one, but no one else,
I
right?
know.
Like they've already tested it against 50 guys.
And the database.
And nothing is hitting.
I know. So this is the same story that we know and hate.
Mm-hmm.
Weeks turn into months and then turn into years. And then with every day that passes, they just hope and pray that their guy will slip up and his DNA will get collected. Until then, this case just kind of ends up looming over Carlsbad PD as it gets passed from one detective to the next and the next. And it becomes sort of the department-wide white whale. Everybody wants to see this thing get solved. And they try everything. A $52,000 reward, pleas to the media. Per the San Diego Union Tribune, Jody's family even puts her cold case information on display in public buses, just in case there's someone out there with info. Like, if there is someone out there with info, though, they are holding on tight to their secret. But, lucky for police, we are about to hit an era of investigating where DNA can do all the talking. In 2016, so 9 years after Jody's murder, a new detective takes over the case. Lieutenant Eric Covanda. And this is just after the PD decided to tap Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia to do forensic phenotyping with the DNA sample they have. And I know we've touched on this before, like this is something that's come up in a lot of cases, but for our new crime junkies, would you mind?
Sure. The phenotype composites can predict a suspect's like eye color, hair color, skin tone, even sometimes like the facial structure based on the DNA makeup. There are obviously several other factors at play that can make someone look different.
Right, like facial hair or somebody's weight or...
Yeah, substance use can change your appearance. But this gives them like a baseline of some key characteristics that they can use to at least help rule people in or out. Like eye color is like pretty cut and dry.
Exactly. So Jody's case was actually the first time that Carlsbad PD ever used this kind of technology. And Lieutenant Covanda says he's sort of treating the composite as a filter. It might not look exactly like the suspect, but if a person of interest pops up with, like you said, a different eye color, different hair color, skin color, he can at least like rule people out much quicker, right? So they get this composite back, and Lieutenant Covanda literally says it looks like every other surfer dude out there right now.
Which I've seen a lot of the Parabon composites, and they kind of do just look like a guy.
They all blend into the same person. It was like very cool the first couple of times we saw it.
And they're like, it's just the same dude.
Yeah, eventually we're like, got it. So truly you are just looking for like color of like eyes, hair, something like that. So yeah, they end up getting this sort of nondescript white guy with bluish green eyes, dirty blonde hair, fair skin, and some freckling. But the trick is they do have the ability to make some tweaks using the information that they have or based on their theories. Like substance use, right? You said was a part of the profile, and substance use usually alters someone's appearance. So Covanda had the lab increase the composite's BMI, had him age him a little bit, adding like deeper creases, a 5 o'clock shadow. So that's the photo that they released to the public on the 10th anniversary of Jody's murder. And they do this on the steps of the San Diego courthouse. And immediately, tips start pouring in. Tips that they probably had, like, not in a way that they've seen in a long time. But even with this influx of new information, nothing pans out. Still, this new technology has really gotten Lieutenant Covanda's wheels turning. He's made a lot of connections by that point with people in like the DNA science world. And he's learning about all of the other ways that they can use DNA to get more info. Info like a suspect's name with something called YSTR profiling, which that's a method used to analyze DNA on the Y chromosome. And that is what's passed down from father to son, virtually unchanged. And since last names are also typically passed down the paternal line, Y profiling testing can be used to predict a person by their last name by comparing their Y profile to entries already in DNA databases. But you have to remember that there are certain limitations when it comes to this kind of testing. Things that can break the pattern, like infidelity or genetic mutations.
Or adoption.
Or adoption, right. That's actually one of the most common. But listen, take what you can get, right? And then we'll figure out the next steps from there. So this, again, is like a first for Carlsbad PD. This is the first time they're ever using this kind of technology as well. And they do get a last name after all the YSTR work. Miracle. Which of course, is like a detective right out of CSI Miami taking off his sunglasses and like squinting into the sun. You can like see it, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
These detectives could not help themselves. They begin saying, it's going to take a miracle to solve this one. Detectives spend the coming year looking for their miracle. But it turns out there was no one they could find with that last name who also fit the composite sketch. So it was looking more and more like one of those pattern breakers happened in this family line. Infidelity, adoption, something. But in the year or less that it's taken to feel pretty sure of this, guess what happens? 2018 is upon us.
Oh, and with all this science talk, you're talking about the Golden State Killer.
Yeah. Golden State Killer gets caught using the most current version of what we all now know as IgG, investigative genetic genealogy. You know, Golden State dude left his DNA all over crime scenes, but he, like this one, wasn't in a database. So instead of looking for the offender himself, GSK investigators decided to look for distant family members whose DNA might be on file in public databases like GEDmatch, and then create this extensive family tree that might connect back to their suspect. Now, when they started down this path, it took them 4 months to catch a serial killer and rapist who eluded them for decades. So when Lieutenant Covanda sees this gets his gears spinning. Forget turning, they are like almost smoking, right? Like, here he is working on another case where the offender's DNA is all over the crime scene, and a full profile is in CODIS, but they just keep striking out. So Covanda starts doing his homework, trying to figure out if he could make use of the same techniques. And it just so happens that around the same time, this is May of 2018, the lab that did the initial phenotyping for Jody's case comes back to Carlsbad PD and basically says like, hey, by the way, we've still got your offender's DNA on file from that test that we did last year. Do you want us to evaluate it using IgG?
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Exactly. Like, you do not have to ask twice.
Yeah.
So they do this, they get the blessing, and just 2 months later, the lab reaches back out. Lieutenant Covanda says he literally gets on a Zoom call with them where they share their screen. They're showing what he calls a hasty family tree, which basically shows the closest connections and the most recent common ancestors associated with the DNA sample. Now, it's not one name. There are a few possibilities. But now it's up to Carlsbad PD to run each one of these down.
Okay, and of these names, like, are any of them miracles, like the YSTR suggested?
Surprisingly, no. Lieutenant Covanda actually said that the lab wasn't really focusing on the miracle last name. And, you know, when they got a few of them back, there were some that they discounted pretty quickly. Like, there was one last name, murdaugh, that they just kind of brushed aside for a couple of reasons. Like, they told the detective, A, murdaugh is of Italian origin, and the offender's DNA suggested someone of Northern European descent. And B, they're like, this murdaugh guy is dead. So
Like, dead before 2007?
No, he was alive in 2007. But this is why it is always good to gut check yourself. Not to get too tied up in what you expect something to be. Because basically, investigators get all the way to the end of the list of all these last names and people that the lab really thought it could be, and they still have nothing to show for it. But Lieutenant Covanda is not willing to give up just yet. If you want to get something solved, like the GSK case, why not go to the exact person who helped solve it? And that is Barbara Ray Venter. Barbara isn't a cop. She's not a detective. She's a retired 70-year-old patent lawyer who just happens to be really, really good at genealogy, which she only discovered after retiring, by the way, when she started mapping her own heritage as a hobby. And that hobby quickly turned into volunteering as a search angel. That's someone who helps adoptees find their biological parents by creating family trees from DNA. And when she got really good at that, police departments started calling. So Lieutenant Covanda gets a hold of Barbara's number, and while he's in Northern California trying to get some more reference DNA samples for Jody's case, he calls her up and invites her to breakfast with him and this other investigator from the DA's office named Tony Johnson. She says sure. So they go to breakfast together in what Barbara describes as this total hole in the wall, and they're eating eggs and pancakes and talking about genealogy. And Lieutenant Covanda says it's just like mind confetti for him, because all the labs he'd spoken to before had basically just told him how much he should pay them and how long it would take. But here is Barbara, totally like pulling back the curtain, explaining her entire process.
And does she agree to take on the case?
Yes. After this meeting, Lieutenant Covanda gives Barbara access to the offender's DNA profile in GEDmatch, and she goes to work.
So is her process different than that original lab?
It's the same. She's just better at it. Because interestingly, Barbara actually comes back to Covanda with a name that was on the first lab's list.
Wait, murdaugh?
Murdaugh. That's the one that the other lab had totally discounted. But Barbara is saying this, she believes, is where Carlsbad PD needs to spend their time. Because this last name actually does have a connection to, get this, the Miracle last name.
What?
Yeah, because when Barbara looks deep into the genealogy, she sees a double adoption in the Miracle family. So basically, at some point, a man with the last name Miracle had a son named Robert, who was adopted and took on the Italian last name Murdaugh. Robert then has two sons of his own, Stephen, who gets adopted, and David, who carried on the Murdaugh last name.
So it could potentially be Stephen or David.
Or even their dad, Robert. Covanda is going to need DNA from all three to be sure, but he is feeling so confident. In a matter of like a year, he went from an endless pool of suspects to 3. Now, as it turns out, both Stephen and David were deceased at this point. They both died after Jody's murder, so that doesn't rule them out, but it does make getting their DNA slightly more challenging.
Right.
Or at least it might have. You see, Stephen passed away in an accident in 2017, which meant that his DNA was actually still on file at the medical examiner's office. So they get it, they run it, and it's not Stephen. As for the dad, Robert, he was totally estranged from his sons and living in a different area at the time of the murder. Plus, just looking at his age and capability, like, they didn't think they were necessarily compatible with the specific manner of the crime, which really, like, if they're going to look at anyone, their next person they want to look at is David. Now, they find out he passed away in 2011, and his DNA is nowhere to be found. But he does have an ex-wife and an 18-year-old son that are both still living right there in Carlsbad. So Covanda gets this idea to have the lab do a sort of paternity test where they could use the ex-wife's DNA, the son's DNA, to basically reconstruct David's. But obviously, like, he's going to need permission for that. And at this point, no one in the Murdaugh family even knows that police are, like, going down this road.
Can you imagine, like, the police showing up at your door and being like, hey, we think your ex-husband did this absolutely horrific thing 10 years ago.
First of all,
Not sure if you knew about it.
Every time there's an IGG solve, yes, I do imagine this specific thing exactly. But they, at least in this case, they're a little like more surreptitious than that. So on the evening of October 26, 2018, Lieutenant Covanda and Tony Johnson, they show up at the home of David's ex, Marissa Murdaugh. It's actually Marissa and David's son who answers the door, and we're going to use a pseudonym for him and call him Dan. So Dan answers the door. He goes to get his mom, who is out in the backyard having an after-work drink, and he says, there's some Carlsbad detectives here, and they want to talk to you. And of course, mom's first thought is like, oh my God, what did my kid do? You know what I mean? But right away, when she goes inside and talks to the detectives, they put that thought out of her mind. First thing they say is, nobody's in trouble. We're here to investigate a cold case. Now, Marissa's totally confused, but she agrees to sit down with them. And that's when they start explaining the details of Jody's case. Now, because Jody's story got so much coverage, Marissa sort of remembered hearing about it. But in her mind, at this point, she's like asking the question, right? Like, what does any of this
why
have
are you
to
here?
do with me? Right. And this is when Lieutenant Covanda starts explaining all of the genetic genealogy work that he's been doing. But the way that they were explaining it, I think it maybe seemed like they were looking for either a cousin or an uncle
Like a
or
relative.
a relative of David's dad, even not even David.
Oh.
So she's not thinking in this moment that her ex-husband has anything to do with this crime. And so Marissa starts giving investigators David's whole family history. She says that his heritage was actually somewhat complicated.
Which they obviously kind of know already.
Yep, and she confirms the double adoption stuff, the miracle last name. She eventually tells them that David took his own life unexpectedly in 2011. That's how he died. And when she's done laying everything out, they're like, okay, well, would you and your son be willing to give your DNA to rule you out of like this whole situation? And obviously both Marissa and Dan are like, yeah, totally.
But investigators want to use this DNA to confirm David's involvement.
Yeah, and it's not totally clear to me if they're like trying to skirt around the truth a little bit, or if Marissa doesn't totally understand the gravity of why they're asking this. Because I do know that like when they first brought up David's name during the visit, Marissa got really upset. And she straight up says, if you think David did this, you need to get the F out of my house. You're out of your mind. So after that, investigators focused a lot of their questions on like David's family and stuff, kind of backed off. But looking back, you can see why they might have wanted to use any means necessary to get her to talk. Because every suspicion they had, every DNA clue, led them to the right David. And when the results came back on Dan and Marissa's DNA, the lab says they are confident David is their guy. David murdered Jody and Serrin. But before Covanda is going to tell this to Marissa, before he even tells Jody's family, he wants to be 110% certain. I mean, this information is going to totally upend both families' lives, right? So he wants to go back to Marissa one more time. And this time around, his questions are a bit different. They're more pointed. He wants to know about Marissa's relationship with David. He wants to know about their sex life. And he's got Jody's case file with him, and he's taking everything down in a notebook. And Marissa, in this second one, she's starting to get really frustrated. She's like, all of these questions are about David and not his family. Like, do you think he did this? And the reality must be setting in because she starts hyperventilating, and that's when she sees it. One of the images Covanda brought with him from Jody's file is visible. It's from the crime scene, and it's not anything graphic, but it makes her sick to her stomach nonetheless, because it's a photo of the suspect's sneakers, of David's sneakers. And Marissa was sure of it because she was the one who bought those sneakers for him. Investigators obviously noticed Marissa's reaction to the sneakers, and so they ask her, do these look familiar? And in that moment, she says no. It's a lie, but I mean, she can barely process what's going on, and her mind just immediately goes to her son. She's like, how in the world am I gonna tell this to Dan? And so she really just says no to buy herself some time. Like, she has a ton to digest. And even though she's totally flustered, she doesn't kick investigators out of her house or anything. She continues answering their questions about her and David's life together, their separation, and then David's untimely death in 2011. And as she's telling them this story of the days and events leading up to his death, something clicks for both her and police kind of at the same time. You see, she had never known why David took his own life. He didn't leave behind a note, nothing. I mean, his poor son is the one who found him when he and his mom came back from a trip. David was actually staying with them at the time, sleeping on the couch, and Dan found his dad dead of an overdose that ends up getting ruled a suicide. They never knew why. But now she's realizing maybe this was why. Because Marissa tells investigators that a week before David took his own life, there was this incident that happened. He was driving in Oceanside, which is just the town over from Carlsbad, when his truck broke down. So he's behind his truck trying to push it when an officer from Oceanside PD stopped him and said that he matched the description of a suspect that they had in an Oceanside bank robbery. So the officer asks him, would you be willing to give your DNA? And David consented to that. Officer took an oral swab, got a photo of David, lets him go. And it's after this that David began to spiral, Marissa says. I mean, he spent the next week freaking out, acting super strange. And I don't mean just like general anxiety. He was losing it. At one point, he was like even rubbing spices all over his face.
What?
And at the time, he tried to say it was like helping him with headaches or like fine lines or something. But even then, Marissa knew that something was off. Like, this isn't normal behavior for him or for anyone.
But at the time, she's not connecting it to anything?
No, I mean, like, she knew about the stop and the DNA swab, and, like, she knew that that happened, but I guess she really didn't think anything of it at the time. I mean, it's not like she's thinking David's DNA is going to connect him to the brutal murder from a couple of years before. And she didn't even make the connection after his death because, by the way, the whole bank robbery thing, that really had nothing to do with David. And because of that, guess what? They never had to run David's swab or put it into CODIS, which is probably the very thing David feared so much that it drove him to suicide. So it's not till now, sitting with Lieutenant Covanda in her house, seeing the photo of David's sneakers at the crime scene, that Marissa is starting to put the pieces together. And so is Lieutenant Covanda. But his mind is spinning for a different reason. Because if Oceanside PD still has David's DNA from that 2011 swab, he might be able to do a direct comparison with the DNA found at Jody's crime scene. And sure enough, by some miracle is the magic word for this episode, Oceanside PD has it.
Oh my God.
So on November 7th, Covanda sends the sample to the lab to be tested for the first time since it was taken 7 years ago. It takes 2 days for the results to come back. And when they do, it is a match, which means that now Covanda is 110% sure. He can finally tell the Serrins that after 11 years, the wait is over. And they were so close to losing hope. But finally, they know who that man was in Jody's room that Valentine's Day back in 2007. Now, detectives can't give them every answer, like where Jody might have come into contact with this guy or why he even attacked her.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Did David have any connection to her? There was nothing?
None that they can find. Like so many of the IGG solves that we've seen over the years, his name never so much as came up in the case file from even a random tip.
Wow.
Like, this guy was not on their radar at all. Now, they did find out that in the past he'd abused drugs. Marissa thought he'd been clean and sober like her for years when they were raising their son together, and even after they split up, she was like letting him stay at her place on her couch. But it's very possible he was using again. Also, I think about that substance abuse clinic that was next to the place that Jody volunteered. So
right,
like that's
had he been there?
So this is the thing, right? So this is how it all got teed up. I don't know if we know he used or used to use drugs. We know this clinic was there. So I was going to say this could be somewhere that they would have met. And I don't know because it never really got run down. And like we see this all the time. That kind of stuff, like making those connections, is all stuff that you learn when you're like building a case against someone.
Like for trial.
Yeah, but I'm seeing this all the time with these IGG cases when you work backwards. And especially when the person is deceased, like you don't have to go back and figure out the like where and whatever to like prove
all the little details to build the full puzzle out. You kind of have the picture at the beginning.
Yeah, and so investigators just don't. And listen, on one hand, I get it. Like there's 100 other unsolved cases like Jody's that they need to focus on. They don't need to be creating work for themselves. But it still kills me because we talked about this at the top. We know how devious this crime was. Was this really a one-off?
Yeah.
What if he did commit other crimes?
Yeah.
I mean, we know his DNA in the database hasn't matched anything else, but like we said, the MO, what if he would have cleaned up? What if there's nothing left? What if by tracking him, we can figure out where they met and then that shows an MO to like other missing people or something like, again, I have a zillion questions after a case like this, especially like, who was this guy? How did he have a wife and a kid and just live a normal life? Did he actually live a normal life? Or were there red flags? Could anyone have seen this coming? And normally, these are questions that you and I spiral on and we get left with. And then we have to move on to the next case. But not this time. Because this time, our reporter Nicole Kagan traveled out to California and met with the one person who had all the answers that I'm looking for. The one person who could give us insight into who David Murdaugh was in 2007.
Can you say and spell your name for us?
Marissa,
Murdabrito. He was my family. He's my son's dad. Gave me the best thing in the world. And did the most horrific thing to somebody in the world. I don't know how to reconcile those two.
But Marissa has tried. She's gone back over every moment since meeting David on the beach in 1995, and she's had to rewire her brain to understand how he could have been capable of such a vicious crime all along. And yes, there were potentially signs, but how do you know what to look for if no one talks about it? In the interview, there was a moment where Nicole, our reporter, is like, "Are you sure you're good with all of this being on the record?"
Yeah.
And Marissa's like, "Yes, this is my truth, and this is David's truth as I know it." And you guys, this is a side of the story we almost never get to tell you. And I didn't want to cut it short by trying to squeeze it all into one episode. More importantly, I wanted you to hear it directly from Marissa in her own words. So because Jodine Serrin is the 7 of diamonds on a cold case playing card deck before her case got solved, we dedicated a full episode of the deck to Marissa's attempt at solving her own mystery. How could this man she loved and trusted have committed this unthinkable crime? That episode of The Deck, which is the other weekly true crime show that I host, if you didn't know, you know, it's available right now. You can listen to that episode of The Deck wherever you get your podcasts. You can find all of our source material on our website, crimejunkiepodcast.com. And then for more episodes like this one, bonus episodes we've never released, and all of our episodes ad-free, be sure to join our fan club. You'll also get early access to new episodes every week.
And you can follow us on Instagram at Crime Junkie Podcast.
We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. But in the meantime, don't forget to check out The Deck.
Human beings are strange creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you could ever imagine. And then they lie about it until the truth is buried under layers of incompetence and apathy. I have spent my life looking into the eyes of people who thought they were smarter than the evidence. And let me tell you, the evidence always speaks, even when the people around it refuse to listen. You look at a case like this, the story of Spencer Irwin, and you have to ask yourself, how does a death turn into a ghost story that nobody wants to solve? My, you have to be kidding me. Here we have a 30-year-old man, found in a condition that would make any investigator worth his salt stop and take a long, hard look, naked, covered in dirt, at the bottom of a loading dock. And what do the boys in Fresno do? They shrug. They assume an overdose. They assume the world is a simple place where people just wander off and expire because they had much to drink. I tell you, that is a lazy man's way to earn a paycheck. They did not even perform an autopsy. Can you imagine that? They had a body, a suspicious set of circumstances, and they decided that blood samples were enough to wrap it up with a bow. That is not police work. That is an insult to the badge. Kelly Irwin, the mother, she knew better. She knew her son was struggling with alcohol, sure, but she also knew who he was. Mothers have a way of seeing through the fog that blinds everybody else. When authorities told her it was natural causes, that he died from some cardiac event, she did not buy it. And why should she? If a man dies of natural causes, he is usually in his bed, not stripped bare behind a waste company building. The lack of footprints? That is a red flag the size of a billboard. It means he did not walk there to lay down and die. It means he was placed there. Someone moved him. Think about the logic of it. The police claim there is no evidence of a homicide. Well, there is no evidence because they did not look for any. They did not collect his clothes. They ignored the surveillance footage. When a mother has to go out and map the timeline herself, tracking his walk to a store, finding the inconsistencies in who was in his apartment, and spotting a white Kia Soul lurking in the dark on camera, you know the system has failed. That car, turning off its lights, hanging around for 15 minutes in the dead of night, that is not the behavior of a man who has nothing to hide. That is a signature. And then you have this individual, this Angel Gonzalez, showing up in the apartment when the landlord checks on Spencer. He claims to be a cousin, but that smells like a lie from a mile away. Everything about this timeline is jagged. It does not fit. And yet, the detectives wanted to stick to their guns, blaming meth, blaming the life he lived, trying to gaslight a grieving mother because it was easier than doing the hard, grinding work of a real investigation. I have stood in rooms with murderers who thought they were invisible. They think that if they stay quiet, if they let the bureaucrats get lazy, the past will just fade away. But the truth is a stubborn thing. It waits. It lingers in the dirt at that loading dock. It stays in the frame of that security camera. Spencer Irwin was a human being, not a case number to be discarded because the paperwork was too much of a bother. Every time I see a department take the easy road, I think about the souls they leave behind. You have to be better than that. You have to be willing to look at the ugly parts, the things that do not make sense, and pick at them until the truth bleeds out. Because if you do not, you are just waiting for the next one to come along, and that, my friend, is a tragedy we can all do without. Human beings are curious creatures. They walk this earth, they breathe our air, and yet they are capable of making the most absurd, most pathetic, and most irreversible decisions you could possibly imagine. I have spent a lifetime looking into the hollow eyes of men who thought they were smarter than the law, and every single time, I tell you, they find out that gravity eventually catches up to them. My. You see, the truth has a funny way of surfacing, even when you bury it under a mountain of lies. And when those lies start to twist and turn like a cornered snake, you know you are not dealing with confusion or a bad memory or a simple mistake. You're looking at a cold, hard, bold-faced lie. This is the story of Christopher Cole Thomas, a young man who did not vanish into the night alone, but was erased in the presence of people who called themselves his friends. It is just after 3 a.m. on Black Friday in the year 2016 in the quiet town of Benson, North Carolina. Two men, Julian Vias Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter, walk up to some police officers in a parking lot. They are not screaming. They are not frantic. They are just, they say, in need of a little assistance. They claim they were traveling with their buddy, Christopher Cole Thomas, whom they call Cole, when he suddenly, inexplicably, decided to become paranoid, pull the vehicle over, snatch the keys, and bolt into the darkness of North Johnson Street. They act as if they have no idea why he left or where he went. They try to sell the officers on the idea that Cole had some mysterious mental health issues, a convenient excuse that smells worse than rotten fish. The officers check the area, find absolutely nothing, and for a few hours, the authorities operate under the assumption that a grown man simply decided to walk away from his life. But that is the thing about people, is it not? They think they can script reality. You have to be kidding me. Cole was 22 years old. He was a bright young man, a former salutatorian, a kid who had plans for medical school and a heart big enough to be inspired by his younger brother, who has autism. He was not the type to just run off into the abyss without a word to his family. His parents, Chris and Kathy, did not even know he was in North Carolina. They were under the impression he was working a contract job in Minnesota. And that is where the house of cards begins to crumble. Because while these so-called friends, Julian and Jeremy, were busy crafting their little fairy tale for police, they did not have the decency, or perhaps the courage, to call the boy's father. But the father, a man who knows his son, found his way to a co-worker named Stephen on social media. And Stephen, he had a different story. He spoke of a strip search. He spoke of a drug deal gone sideways. He spoke of dangerous men. He looked the father in the eye, figuratively speaking, and uttered the words no parent should ever have to hear. I think they killed him. You have to be kidding me. When you follow the trail of the lie, you eventually find a motive. These men did not drive across the country for a Thanksgiving dinner. They drove to Mount Olive to buy methamphetamine. They met with Rudolfo de Leon Jr., known as Rudy, and Anthony James Jr., known as TJ. And when the truth of that meeting finally forced its way out of Julian and Jeremy, the story evolved again. Now, it was not just a random panic attack. Now, Cole was paranoid about the deal. Now, they were supposedly being followed, but the surveillance footage from a Walgreens, captured by the sharp eyes of a detective who refused to let this go, told the real story. At 1:10 in the morning, Cole is walking, and right behind him, like a shadow that refused to fade, is Jeremy Carpenter. They were not alone, and that is the moment the facade shattered. Every step they took, every word they spoke after that, was just another layer of deception. We later learned that Cole's phone, which they claimed he had taken with him, was in their possession the entire time. They held on to his digital life, while his actual life was being snuffed out. By the middle of the year 2017, grand jury indictments brought Julian, Jeremy, Rudy, and TJ into custody, charged with concealing a death and obstruction of justice. But a private investigator named David Marshburn dug deeper, uncovering a web of threats and the grim possibility of a double cross. He believed that Julian might have been working with the dealers, setting up a plan to sell the drugs and then steal them back. And Cole, a young man who had the intelligence to understand Spanish, likely realized the trap he had walked into. He heard them. He knew he was not running from his own mind. He was running from a death sentence. And when you realize that your friends are the ones leading you to the slaughter, the silence of the night becomes the loudest sound on earth. These men thought they could dance around the truth, but the truth is a heavy thing. It does not go away. It waits, it watches, and eventually it puts you in a cage. My. The tragedy is not just that a young man's life was cut short by the greed and cowardice of others. The tragedy is the arrogance of those who thought they could outsmart the inevitable. They failed. They are exactly where they deserve to be. My. Humans are peculiar creatures. They destroy themselves over the most foolish reasons imaginable. Reasons that would make a sane man pause and wonder the world has simply lost its collective mind. I tell you, this case is one of those that burrows under your skin and refuses to leave. You have to be kidding me. You think to yourself as you sift through the wreckage of a life. Yet here we are. It is the story of the Jameson family, Bobby, Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison. They were a family searching for a fresh start, looking to carve out a piece of the world in the rugged terrain of Latimer County, Oklahoma. They were so close to reaching for that horizon, but something, or perhaps someone, stepped in to ensure they would never get there. You look at the facts, the hard, cold facts, and they scream of a nightmare. October 17th, 2009, is when the world finally realized something was dreadfully wrong. A pickup truck was found abandoned on Panola Mountain. A small, emaciated dog was trapped inside, clinging to life by a thread, having been locked away for days. When Sheriff Israel Beecham and his men opened that vehicle, they found items that painted a confusing portrait of desperation. Keys and ignition, $32,000 in cash tucked away, identifications, coats, and a 7-page letter from Sherilyn to her husband, Bobby. It was a document of raw, unfiltered agony, filled with accusations of attempted murder, claims of toxic behavior, and pleas for forgiveness regarding matters of the spirit. It spoke of a woman pushed into a corner, a woman who felt she had no escape. Why was that money left behind? Why was that dog left to starve? These are the questions that haunt an investigator. They have been scouting land, planning to live off the grid in a shipping container, attempting to retreat from a society they no longer trusted or understood. Yet the evidence trail is a tangled web. You have a photograph of young Madison standing before a cluster of rocks, taken at 2:51 in the afternoon on the 8th of October. She looks like a child caught in a moment of hesitation, or perhaps realization. The authorities knew exactly where that photo was taken, but the trail ends there. The truck was pointed downhill, as if they were prepared to depart, yet they never did. The background of this family is a tapestry of tragedy. They were battling addiction, poverty, and the crushing weight of deteriorating mental health. Sherilyn struggled with bipolar disorder and major depressive disorder, and Bobby was fighting the demons of chronic pain following a severe back injury. Their lives were consumed by legal battles, including a particularly nasty dispute with Bobby's own father, which led to a protective order and claims of violence. There was talk of witchcraft, of demons, of a house heavy with the presence of things unseen. Friends spoke of mist floating downstairs, of a darkness that made one feel physically ill, whether this was a result of a mind unraveling or something else entirely. It created an atmosphere where the truth became impossible to discern from the shadows. For 4 years, the mountain kept its secrets. It was not until November of 2013 that a hunter named Tim Graham found the remains, 3 skulls scattered in the brush. Just 2.6 miles from where the truck had been abandoned, the discovery shattered the silence, but offered little in the way of closure. The distance, the terrain, the condition of the remains, none of it points to a simple, clean explanation. It is a puzzle missing half its pieces. The murder-suicide theory persists in the minds of many, fueled by that hate-filled letter and the volatility of the parents. But how does one explain the logistics? How does a family struggling with such immense physical and mental burdens traverse that landscape to a final resting place without leaving a single trace for years? It brings me to a heavy realization about the nature of humanity. We like to think there is a tidy answer for every crime, a villain to catch, a motive to uncover. But sometimes, the facts are just as jagged and unyielding as the mountainside where these people perished. There is a coldness to this mystery that defies simple logic. Whether they were victims of their own inner turmoil or the targets of something far more malicious, one thing is certain: a little girl who deserved a future was denied one, and a family's dream ended in the dirt. Justice is not always a loud, triumphant thing. Sometimes it is a quiet, unresolved ache that stays with you long after the case file has been closed. I tell you, it is a haunting reminder that in this world, sometimes the most profound truth is simply that we are all walking through our own version of the woods, never knowing what lies just beyond the trees. Human beings, they are strange creatures. They kill for reasons so petty, so twisted, that you would not believe it even if you saw it in a court of law. I have spent a lifetime looking into the eyes of monsters, and let me tell you, the darkness inside them is a cold, lonely place. You have to be kidding me. I thought to myself when I first saw the file on David Meyerhofer, a man who thinks he is smarter than the rest of the world, playing a game of cat and mouse with a grieving mother. My, it is the height of arrogance. It is the summer of 1973. 12-year-old Heidi Yeager wakes up to a breeze in a tent in Montana. You are camping. You are in the woods. The air is supposed to be still. It is supposed to be safe. But then she sees the hole, a jagged, deliberate tear in the fabric, and her sister, 7-year-old Susie, is gone, vanished into the thin mountain air. It is a parent's worst nightmare, the kind that keeps you awake for the rest of your life. Bill and Marietta Yeager, they did not know it then, but their lives had just splintered into a million pieces. I tell you, the helplessness in that moment is absolute. They searched the campground. They screamed her name into the blackness, and all they found were stuffed animals left in the wet grass. It was a scene of calculated cruelty. When the authorities arrived, they found a history that should have sounded a deafening alarm. 5 years earlier, a boy named Michael Rainey had been stabbed in his tent at that very same spot. The connection was staring him in the face, but the dots had not yet been connected. It is a mistake that haunts every law enforcement officer who has ever lived. We look for patterns. We look for shadows. And sometimes we miss the wolf standing right in the light. Then came the calls. The man claiming to be the kidnapper, demanding money, talking about deformed fingernails on the child's hands. A detail so specific, so intimate, that it had to be someone who knew her, someone who had been watching. The audacity of this person, calling the homeless deputy, raising the ransom, playing with the emotions of people who were already shattered. It was not just a crime. It was a performance. He wanted the power. He wanted to see how far he could push them before they broke. The investigation dragged on, a slow, agonizing crawl through dead ends and false leads. The police were working in the dark, and frankly, at that time, they were still learning how to turn on the light. They had polygraphs, which they thought were the gospel truth, and they had David Meyerhofer, a man who seemed to be everywhere. He was the local carpenter, the guy who would walk up to you at the diner and ask questions about the case, acting like a concerned citizen. But that is what they do, isn't it? The predators. They like to stand right next to the people looking for them. They like to hear the sirens from the front row. When the bones were finally found in that burn pile near the old ranch in February of 1974, the truth finally tore through the silence. They were not just looking for a kidnapper anymore. They were looking for a destroyer of lives. Those remains confirmed the nightmare. Little Susie Yeager and 19-year-old Sandy Dickman, both reduced to ash. It makes my skin crawl just thinking about the absolute lack of humanity required to do such a thing, to take a life, to end a story that was just beginning, and then to treat the aftermath like a discardable pile of waste. It is pure, unadulterated evil. The FBI had started using criminal profiling, a nascent field that the local guys were skeptical of. But the math does not lie. They described a loner, a man in his 20s, someone with military experience, someone who kept souvenirs and inserted himself into the investigation. They described David Meyerhofer to a T. He had the profile, he had the proximity, and he had the coldness to keep calling that mother a year later, promising her that her child was alive, when he had already turned her into dust. How can a man look at himself in the mirror after that? He cannot. He hides behind lies. He hides behind the mask of normalcy. But eventually, the mask slips. The rancher in Bozeman who got that strange phone bill in the middle of the night, that was the thread that finally unraveled the whole ugly tapestry. You see, the arrogance of these people is their undoing. They think they are the smartest person in the room until they make one small mistake, one tiny, overlooked bill, and suddenly the cage door starts to close. It is a tragedy of the highest order. A young girl, a stolen life, and a mother who kept her post, tape recorder in hand, hoping against hope that her baby would come home. Marietta Yeager's strength was extraordinary, a lighthouse in a storm of darkness. She stood up to a man who wanted to destroy her, and she refused to let him win, even when the world told her there was no hope left. That is the nature of the human spirit. It survives, it fights, and even when it is broken, it keeps the memory of those we have lost alive. And that, in the end, is the only way we beat the monsters. We remember, we tell the truth, and we never, ever let them be forgotten. Human beings are strange creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you can imagine. Jealousy, rage, the absolute inability to handle reality. It is a toxic cocktail that turns ordinary people into monsters. You have to be kidding me. You look at a life like Shirley Pierce, a woman who was a ray of sunshine in Kannapolis, a Southern belle who finally found the true love of her life with Chuck Reeves, and then you see how it all ends in a bathtub with water running over a motionless body. It makes you sick. I tell you, it just shook me to my core. My, the scene was gruesome. Multiple stab wounds on her neck and face. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was an act of pure, unadulterated hatred. I could smell the bleach the moment I walked into that house. The killer had tried to clean up, to wash away the evidence. But you cannot wash away the stain of a murder so easily. You have to be careful with bleach. It leaves patterns, it ruins carpets, and it tells a story of panic. The killer was desperate. When I first sat down with Chuck Reeves, the fiancé, I was looking for cracks. You always look for the cracks. He was devastated, articulate, and cooperative, but as a detective, you never take anything at face value. We cleared him quickly because his alibi was rock solid. He was working out of town. That brought us to the ex-boyfriend, Richard. 10 years of bad blood, threats, a restraining order. It all seemed to point toward a classic vendetta. But when we found him, he was barely able to walk due to health issues. He was not our guy. It was a dead end. Then came the call that changed everything. A husband, Irvin Johnson, calling to say he thought his wife, Marlene Johnson, had killed someone. Imagine the weight of those words. Irvin was the chief financial officer at the same company where Shirley worked. He told us about his marriage, about Marlene, a woman who lived in a world where she expected everyone to bow to her will. She was possessive, erratic, and deeply, dangerously obsessed. Marlene had convinced herself that Shirley was having an affair with her husband. She hired private investigators, used drones to watch Shirley, and made it her life's mission to destroy her. I tell you, this woman was a ticking time bomb. She had even physically attacked Shirley at a restaurant, screaming that she would kill her for sleeping with her husband. Shirley, poor, sweet Shirley, thought she was safe because she had done nothing wrong. She didn't understand the dark, twisted mind she was dealing with. When we arrested Marlene, she sat in that interview room acting board, wearing sunglasses, completely detached from the reality of the horror she had committed. She denied everything, but her hands told the truth. Her nails were chipped, the tips missing. Those injuries were consistent with violent struggle and the force required to break a knife while stabbing someone. We found the aerial photos of Shirley's house in Marlene's possession. The level of planning was calculated, cold, and absolutely chilling. The investigation led us to Tim Connor, Marlene's friend and confidant. He initially tried to cover for her, providing an alibi that he claimed held up through the night. But when we found a set of knives in his home with one missing, a knife that matched the blade we recovered from Shirley's neck, the facade crumbled. Tim eventually admitted that he hadn't been honest. He confessed that Marlene had asked him to lie for her, to be her alibi for the night of the murder. Think about that. A woman who felt entitled to own another human being's life, driven by a ghost and affair that never existed, systematically hunting down an innocent woman. It is the height of human arrogance. Marlene Johnson destroyed herself because she could not distinguish between her own sick fantasies and the truth. She sits in a cell now, and I hope, in the silence of that cage, she realizes that all the planning, all the surveillance, and all the hate in the world couldn't hide the monster she really was. It is just unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Fronted with the scientific certainty of his genetic profile being present inside the apartment, the young man broke down in tears and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He had been led to Arlington by his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory. Willie explained that his uncle had been approached by a prominent spiritual advisor in Houston, named Daphne Wright. According to Willie, Daphne was the orchestrator of the entire plan. She had reportedly claimed that the elderly couple owed her an astronomical sum of money, somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000, for spiritual rituals, curse-lifting ceremonies, and prosperity blessings performed over the previous year. When the family's business failed to recover, the debt had continued to grow. Daphne, unwilling to lose her investment, had learned of the substantial life insurance policies. She allegedly proposed a dark solution to recoup her funds, recruiting Bobby Guillory with the promise of a $10,000 payment to execute the deed. Armed with this astonishing revelation, detectives arrested Bobby Guillory on December 16th, the year 2015. Bobby, who had no prior criminal record, confessed to his involvement, confirming that Daphne Wright was indeed the mastermind who had coordinated the logistics, provided the keys to the apartment, and demanded the debt be settled at any cost. Yet a shocking question remained. How had Daphne obtained the key to the elderly couple's apartment? During his interrogation, Bobby looked directly at the detectives and uttered a name that sent a chill through the room. Chow Tran. Chapter 6. The Verdict of Time. The revelation of Chow Tran's potential involvement painted a far more complex picture of devotion, fear, and financial desperation. Investigators learned that the family had become deeply ensnared in Daphne's spiritual influence. They believed implicitly in her power to control fortunes and manipulate destiny. Chow claimed that his mother-in-law, Hong, had grown so desperate to save her family from bankruptcy and the spiritual wrath of the advisor that she had contemplated sacrificing herself so the family could collect the insurance money to pay the staggering debt. While prosecutors harbored deep doubts about this narrative, they recognized that to secure a conviction against the primary instigator, Daphne Wright, they required Chow's detailed testimony. In exchange for his full cooperation and truthful testimony against Bobby, Willie, and Daphne, the state offered Chow immunity from prosecution. In August of the year 2019, the trial of Daphne Wright commenced. The courtroom was filled with quiet tension as the details of the spiritual business were laid bare. The prosecution presented ledger books seized from Daphne's residence, detailing extraordinary fees of tens of thousands of dollars charged to vulnerable clients seeking luck and blessings. Chow Tran took the stand, describing Daphne as an incredibly powerful, demanding figure who held an absolute psychological grip over his family's actions and decisions. The defense countered by arguing that Chow was the true beneficiary of the tragedy, pointing out that the insurance proceeds had gone directly into his bank accounts, enabling the purchase of a new home. Ultimately, after days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory likewise faced the consequences of their actions under the law. Though the legal proceedings reached their formal conclusion, the detectives who had poured their lives into the case remained reflective. The memory of the gentle weavers, Long and Hong, who had crossed oceans in search of a peaceful life, lingered in the hearts of the community. Their journey stood as a poignant reminder of the enduring power of family, the tragic dangers of unchecked greed, and the relentless light of justice that, even after years of darkness, eventually finds its way into the deepest corners of the world. Chapter 1. The Promise of the Lone Star State. The sun always seemed to rise with peculiar warmth over Arlington, Texas. It was a sprawling city in Tarrant County, a place where the concrete highways stretched out like giant ribbons connecting a beautiful mosaic of different cultures. By the late 90s and the early 2000s, the city had become a sanctuary of hope for families from all over the world. Among them were Long Nguyen and his beloved wife, Hong Lu. When they immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, they brought with them very little in the way of material wealth, but their hearts were overflowing with dreams. They possessed an enduring love for each other, a deep respect for their time-honored heritage, and an unwavering commitment to their 3 children and grandchildren. For them, the American dream was not about grand luxury. It was about building a safe harbor where their family could flourish. The Vietnamese community in Arlington was vibrant and tight-knit. The first wave of immigrants had arrived after 1975, following the fall of Saigon. Over the decades, they had built businesses, temples, churches, and neighborhoods that felt like home. Long and Hong chose Arlington because they saw a place where they could combine their traditional values with modern opportunities. They were a sweet, gentle couple. Neighbors often saw them walking hand in hand through their neighborhood, offering warm smiles and kind waves to everyone they passed. To build a legacy for their family, Long and Hong started a commercial sewing business. It was a modest enterprise at first, filled with a steady hum of sewing machines and the vibrant colors of fabrics. They enlisted the help of their son-in-law, Chow Tran, a 38-year-old man who spoke fluent English and possessed a natural knack for business. Chow became the public face of the company, the one who negotiated contracts, spoke with suppliers, and handled the daily interactions with corporate clients. For nearly a decade, their hard work paid off handsomely. The sewing business expanded, and they secured a lucrative contract to make garments for a commercial giant, producing beautiful items for major brands, including Disney. During these years, laughter filled their home, and the future seemed brighter than the Texas sky. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Misfortune. But life, much like the patterns on a woven fabric, has its twists and turns. By the year 2011, the family sewing business faced a severe downturn. The lucrative contract with Disney was lost, and a string of financial difficulties began to weigh heavily on the family. In traditional Vietnamese culture, when a family experiences a sudden run of bad luck, it is not uncommon to seek spiritual answers. For thousands of years, people have believed in the power of spiritual balance, seeking the blessings of the lucky god and the money protection god to bring peace and prosperity. When a family faces a major crisis, such as a business failure or personal distress, they often seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor to lift curses and restore harmony. Hoping to find a solution, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong, began searching through a local Vietnamese newspaper. They found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright, who operated out of Houston, located about 250 miles away. The advertisement claimed she could remove bad curses, bring good fortune, and protect families from negative energy. Encouraged by his family, Chow contacted Daphne and arranged a meeting at her home in Houston. He hoped that her rituals would turn their fortunes around. However, instead of finding relief, the family unknowingly stepped into a dark web of greed. Daphne Wright was not a healer. She was an opportunist who used spiritual manipulation to control her clients. Over the course of a year, as the sewing business continued to struggle, Daphne began charging exorbitant fees for her services. She ran up a massive tab on credit, claiming that more expensive rituals were required to lift the stubborn curse. The debt ballooned to a staggering sum between $250,000 and $280,000. Terrified of spiritual retribution and desperate to save their family, Long, Hong, and Chow continued to pour whatever money they had into Daphne's hands. Chapter 3. A Quiet Morning Broken. On the morning of June 10th, 2012, at 7:29 in the morning, the quiet of a Texas Sunday was broken. Emergency dispatchers received a call from Chow Tran. He sounded highly anxious, requesting a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. He explained that his family had gathered outside the apartment and noticed that a window was open, but no one was answering the door. Officer Weller, a dedicated member of the Arlington Police Department with 14 years of experience, was dispatched to the residence. When he arrived, he found the family standing outside, looking deeply concerned. The early hour and the palpable tension made it clear that this was not a routine welfare check. Upon entering the apartment, Officer Weller noticed signs of what appeared to be a burglary. The living room was in disarray, with compact discs scattered about and furniture moved. Officer Weller called out, but there was only silence. He checked the kitchen, the bathroom, and the living spaces, finding them empty. Finally, he entered the bedroom. Initially, the room seemed vacant, but as he turned to leave, his flashlight caught hand smudges on the wall next to a small closet. A deep instinct told him to hesitate, but his duty compelled him to open the door. Inside the closet, a tragic scene awaited him. Long and Hong had been bound with duct tape and were completely unresponsive. Officer Weller immediately stepped out to the living room, composed himself, and called for a supervisor and the crime scene unit. Chapter 4. The Tangled Web of Clues. Arlington homicide investigators, including Detective Stewart, a veteran with 21 years of experience, arrived at the scene. The physical evidence was puzzling. The apartment had been ransacked, suggesting a robbery. On the coffee table, investigators found a plate of crushed prescription pills and a marijuana cigarette. Additionally, a light blue bandana was wrapped around a beer bottle, a detail that initially pointed toward local gang activity, as light blue was a color associated with certain active Vietnamese youth gangs in the area. However, Detective Stewart was skeptical. The crime scene felt too staged, as if someone had deliberately left a trail of clues to mimic a gang-related robbery. As the investigation proceeded, detectives attended the autopsy at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office. The findings were heartbreaking. The victims had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, but the actual cause of death was suffocation due to the extensive layers of duct tape wrapped around their faces. It was clear that the perpetrators had acted with deliberate, lethal intent. Shortly after the autopsy, Detective Stewart received a call from an insurance company. The detective learned that Long and Hong had a life insurance policy worth $1 million, and one of the primary beneficiaries was their son-in-law, Chow Tran. When questioned, Chow cooperated fully. He provided a detailed, airtight alibi for himself and his family, explaining that they had been celebrating his father-in-law's birthday until 10 o'clock the night, after which they went straight home. Investigators collected DNA and fingerprint samples from Chow and other family members, but none of them matched the evidence found at the scene, including the DNA recovered from the marijuana cigarette. The case eventually went cold for more than 2 years. Chapter 5. The Whispers of Time. For 2 years, the investigation remained at a standstill. Homicide detectives had interviewed more than 50 people, but no solid leads emerged. Then, in October 2015, a breakthrough occurred. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested for stealing a horse in Houston, which is a felony in the state of Texas. Because of this felony conviction, his DNA profile was entered into the national database known as CODIS. Within days, the system flagged a match. Willie's DNA matched the DNA found on the marijuana cigarette left at the crime scene in Arlington back in 2012. At the time of the murders, Willie had been only 16 years old, which was why his profile was not previously in the system. On October 17, 2015, investigators brought Willie in for questioning. When confronted with the scientific evidence, the young man broke down and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He had been recruited by his uncle, Bobby Guillory. Chapter 6. Unmasking the Puppeteer. Willie explained that on June 9, 2012, his uncle Bobby had driven him from Houston to Arlington. Bobby had been given a key to the apartment to stage a burglary. The plan, orchestrated by a spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright, was to make the crime look like a gang-related robbery to help Daphne collect on a massive debt. On December 16, 2015, detectives arrested 52-year-old Bobby Guillory in Katy, Texas, on 2 counts of capital murder. Faced with the evidence, Bobby also confessed. He explained that he had been laid off, was struggling financially, and had been promised $10,000 by Daphne to carry out the deed. Bobby confirmed that Daphne Wright was a mastermind behind the entire plot. When Chow and Hong could not pay the $280,000 debt they owed her, Daphne learned about their substantial life insurance policies. She pressured the family, suggesting that they could collect on the policies to settle their financial obligations. According to Bobby, Daphne obtained the key to the apartment directly from Chow Tran. Chapter 7. The Pursuit of Justice. With this crucial information, detectives obtained a search warrant for Daphne Wright's home in Houston. Inside, they discovered detailed financial ledgers showing that she charged clients tens of thousands of dollars for spiritual services. To secure a conviction against Daphne, prosecutors offered Chow Tran a plea deal of immunity in exchange for his full and honest testimony. Chow agreed to cooperate. On August 26, 2019, the trial of Daphne Wright began. Chow took the stand and described Daphne as a greedy, manipulative woman who used her spiritual influence to control his family. He claimed that he felt completely powerless under her psychological grip. The defense argued that Chow was a willing participant who wanted the insurance payout for himself, noting that there was no written documentation of the alleged $280,000 debt. However, The jury ultimately found the prosecution's case compelling. In September of 2019, Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby Guillory and Willie Guillory also faced justice for their roles in conspiracy. While the legal resolution brought some closure, the memory of Long, Gwyn, and Hong remained a poignant reminder of the importance of community, vigilance, and the pursuit of truth. The dedicated efforts of the Arlington Police Department ensured that those who preyed on the vulnerable were held accountable, allowing community to heal and remember the sweet, hard-working couple for the love and warmth they brought to the Lone Star State. The morning sun of Texas has a way of rising with a sudden golden intensity, casting long and warm shadows across the pavement of Arlington. It was June 10th, 2012, a day that began like many others in Tarrant County, with the gentle hum of early morning traffic and the sweet scent of blooming crepe myrtles carrying on the warm breeze. But beneath the quiet suburban surface, a deeply moving story of family, faith, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice was about to unfold. The gathering on the sidewalk. At exactly 7:29 in the morning, the Emergency Dispatch Center in Arlington received a call. The voice on the other end belonged to Chow Tran, a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant whose tone was thick with mixture confusion and growing worry. He was calling to request a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Gwyn and Hong Lu. The dispatcher, trained to remain calm and collected, listened carefully as Chow explained the situation in his earnest, accented English. "My dad's name is Long, last name Gwyn. He is 70-something right now. My family, my wife, my son, we want to check on them because they did not answer the phone. They saw the window was open, and everything inside seemed to have fallen down. We are too scared to go inside." To the responding officers, a welfare check early in the morning was somewhat unusual. Usually, such requests came later in the day, after hours of unanswered calls. Officer Weller, a dedicated veteran of the force with 14 years of experience, was dispatched to the apartment complex. When Weller arrived, he noticed a large group of people standing outside on the sidewalk. It was an entire extended family, their faces etched with anxiety. The sheer number of people waiting outside immediately signaled to Weller that this was not a routine call. The family members explained that they had knocked on the door, but received no response. Looking closer, they had noticed that one of the windows to the residence was slightly ajar, and the blinds were disrupted. Officer Weller approached the front door, his hand resting instinctively on his utility belt. He knocked loudly and announced his presence. "Arlington Police. Is anyone inside?" Only silence greeted him. Taking a deep breath, Weller opened the unlocked door and stepped into the apartment. The interior was in complete disarray, presenting the classic telltale signs of a burglary. Drawers were pulled out, items were scattered across the floor, and the living room appeared to have been thoroughly ransacked. Compact discs were strewn about, and furniture was pushed out of its normal placement. Weller moved cautiously through the space, calling out as he went. "Hello? Police officer. If anyone is here, please speak up." He checked the kitchen. Finding it empty, he looked into the bathroom, but there was no one there. The only remaining area was the master bedroom. Weller stepped inside. At first glance, the bedroom appeared empty as well. The officer stood in the center of the room, his flashlight beam sweeping across the unmade bed and the cluttered dresser. He began to turn around, thinking that perhaps the elderly couple had simply gone out for an early morning walk and that the apartment had been burglarized while they were away. He felt a brief wave of relief, hoping that the family outside would soon be reunited with their healthy, unharmed grandparents. But as he turned toward the doorway, his flashlight beam caught something on the wall next to a very small closet. There were faint, dark hand smudges on the plaster, as if someone had reached out to steady themselves in a moment of extreme distress. A sudden, heavy hesitation settled over Weller. Every instinct built over a decade of policing urged him to be cautious. He walked over to the small closet door and slowly pulled it open. What he discovered inside would stay with him for the rest of his career. Two elderly individuals, whom he recognized from descriptions as Long Nguyen and Hong Le, were inside the cramped space. They had been bound tightly with silver duct tape around their limbs, and their heads and mouths were heavily wrapped in the same material. There was no movement, no sound. Weller immediately checked for signs of life, but it was far too late. The scene was incredibly violent, with clear evidence of physical trauma. In that split second, the reality of the tragedy set in. Weller felt a wave of shock wash over him. He walked out of the bedroom, his mind racing, unable to speak or even use his radio immediately. He stood in the middle of the quiet living room for several long seconds, gathering his composure, before finally keying his microphone to call for supervisors and the crime scene unit. A legacy of hope and hard work. To understand the weight of this tragedy, one must look back to the year 2000, when Long Nguyen and Hong Le first arrived in the United States from Vietnam. Like thousands of their compatriots who had immigrated in waves since 1975, they brought with them very little in the way of material wealth, but an abundance of hope, determination, and deeply cherished cultural traditions. They chose to settle in Arlington, Texas, a vibrant city in Tarrant County, known for its diverse population and its welcoming, close-knit Vietnamese community. The area had become a haven for immigrant families throughout the 80s and late 90s, offering a supportive network where newcomers could establish businesses, preserve their heritage, and build a legacy for future generations. Long and Hong were the very definition of industrious. Soon after settling in Texas, they established a commercial sewing business. Because they spoke limited English, they enlisted the help of their son-in-law, Chow Tran, to manage the business affairs. Chow, who was energetic and spoke fluent English, became the public face of the enterprise, handling contracts, dealing with suppliers, and managing the day-to-day operations. For nearly a decade, the family business flourished. Through sheer dedication, long hours, and meticulous craftsmanship, they secured highly lucrative contracts, including a prestigious agreement to manufacture garments for a major commercial giant, producing merchandise for Disney. It was the realization of their American dream. They bought a comfortable home, supported their 3 children and grandchildren, and became respected, prominent figures within the local community. Neighbors knew them as a sweet, generous, and gentle couple who never bothered anyone, and were always ready to offer a helping hand. However, the tides of fortune can be fickle. By the year 2011, the national economy had shifted, and the family's business began to face severe challenges. They lost their major contract, and the steady stream of income slowed to a trickle. The sewing workshop, once filled with the rhythmic hum of sewing machines and the cheerful chatter of workers, grew quiet. As the financial pressure mounted, the family began to feel a deep sense of despair. In accordance with traditional beliefs carried over from their homeland, they did not view their misfortune as merely an economic downturn. They believed that a spiritual cloud, perhaps a curse or a misalignment of spiritual energies, had settled over their lives and their business. For generations, many families in their culture believed in spiritual guardians and the protection of ancestral blessings. When facing major life crises, such as impending bankruptcy, severe illness, or legal troubles, it was customary to seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor. These advisors were believed to possess the ability to perform rituals, offer prayers, and lift negative influences to restore harmony and prosperity. Desperate to save the business they had worked so hard to build, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Lu, began searching the local Vietnamese newspapers for help. It was there that they found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor based in Houston, approximately 250 miles away. The advisor, a woman named Daphne Wright, claimed she could remove powerful curses and restore good fortune to those in need. With a glimmer of hope, Chow contacted Daphne and arranged to meet her at her home in Houston. The family was deeply encouraged by her promises, believing that she was the key to turning their fortunes around. They could not have foreseen that this search for a spiritual savior would set off a chain of events, culminating in an unimaginable tragedy. The investigation begins. Within hours of the discovery, the apartment was transformed into a bustling command center. Detective Stewart, a veteran homicide investigator with 21 years of experience, arrived to take charge of the case, having seen some of the city's most challenging cases. Stewart was nonetheless struck by the sheer brutality of the crime. This is one of the worst scenes I've encountered in my over 2 decades in homicide, Stewart remarked to his team as they began their initial walkthrough. The physical evidence suggested a robbery. The living room was disorganized, items were scattered, and valuable electronics seemed to have been targeted. But several details caught the detective's attention, appearing almost too deliberate. On the coffee table sat a small plate containing crushed prescription pills, arranged as if someone had intended to consume them. Nearby, a partially smoked marijuana cigarette lay in an ashtray. Most striking of all was a light blue bandana carefully wrapped around an empty beer bottle left on the table. In Arlington, certain active youth groups and gangs were known to use specific colors, and a light blue bandana was a recognized symbol. At first glance, it appeared that gang members had broken into the home, committed the crime, and left their calling card to claim responsibility. However, Detective Stewart and his team remained skeptical. Sometimes, a crime scene looks a little too perfect, Stewart explained during a briefing. It was set up in a way that practically screamed gang activity. We began to theorize that the scene might have been staged to throw us off the track. To find answers, investigators turned to family. Because of the language barrier and the profound grief affecting the household, Chow Tran acted as the primary spokesperson. He met with Detective Stewart and explained that on the night of June 9th, the entire family had gathered to celebrate Long Wen's birthday. It had been a joyful occasion, filled with laughter and traditional food. According to Chow, the elderly couple had a wonderful time, staying at the party until approximately 10 o'clock in the evening. Another family member had kindly driven them back to their apartment, which was the last time anyone saw them alive. When asked if the couple kept large amounts of cash at home, Chow admitted that while some older immigrants preferred keeping their savings close at hand rather than trusting commercial banks, his in-laws did not have much money left due to the decline of the sewing business. He expressed absolute disbelief that anyone would want to harm them, describing them as peaceful people with no known enemies. On June 11th, 2012, the medical examiner completed the autopsies. The findings were deeply sobering. The victims had suffered significant blunt force trauma to their heads, likely inflicted by a heavy, flat object such as a hammer. However, the head injuries were not the primary cause of death. Hong Lee's face had been wrapped in 25 feet of heavy duct tape, and Long Wen's face had been wrapped in 10 feet of the same material. They had died of suffocation. The realization of the immense suffering the gentle couple had endured redoubled the detectives' determination to find those responsible. A sudden revelation. While the forensic teams processed the apartment for fingerprints, hair fibers, and DNA, a routine notification shook up the direction of the investigation. Detective Stewart received a phone call from an insurance representative. It was standard procedure for insurance companies to contact law enforcement when a policyholder died under suspicious circumstances, particularly when the policy carried a significant value. In this case, the life insurance policies on Long Wen and Hong totaled more than $1 million. When Stewart inquired about the beneficiaries, the answer was unexpected. One of the primary beneficiaries was Chow Tran. On June 13, 2012, investigators invited Chow back to the police station to discuss the business finances and the insurance policies. Chow remained cooperative, explaining that the policies were established to ensure the commercial sewing business could survive and continue supporting the family if either of the elders pass away. Furthermore, Chow and the rest of the family provided consistent, matching alibis for the night of the murders. They explained that after the birthday celebration, they had returned to Chow's home, where they played card games and socialized well past midnight. Forensic analysts successfully extracted a clean DNA profile from the partially smoked marijuana cigarette found on the coffee table. They ran the profile through the national database, hoping for an immediate match that would identify the intruder. Unfortunately, the search yielded no results. The DNA did not match any of the family members, nor did it match any profiles in the federal database. It was a challenging moment for the team, Stewart recalled. When a DNA profile does not appear in the system, it often means the individual has no prior felony convictions, or they might be a minor whose records are not entered in the same manner. Without any new leads, the case gradually slowed. Investigators interviewed over 50 to 60 people, including neighbors, business associates, and community members, but no concrete suspects emerged. For 2 long years, the file remained on the shelf, a quiet testament to a dedicated search for answers that had temporarily run out of road. The thread unravels. The turning point came in October of 2015. More than 3 years after the tragedy, the Arlington Police Department received an automated notification from the state database. A fresh DNA profile had been entered into the system following a felony conviction, and it was a perfect match for the DNA recovered from a marijuana cigarette left at the crime scene. The profile belonged to Willie Guillory, a young man who had recently been convicted of felony involving the theft of a horse near Houston. Crucially, at the time of the murders in 2012, Willie had been only 16 years old, because he was a minor with no prior felony record. His DNA had never been entered into the national database until his recent conviction as an adult. On October 17, 2015, officers located Willie Guillory and brought him to the Arlington Police Station. Initially, Willie was arrested on parole violation rather than a direct warrant for murder, allowing detectives to gauge his cooperation. During the interview, Detective Stewart gently presented the scientific reality of the DNA evidence. He explained how modern forensics worked and why the presence of his DNA on the cigarette inside the apartment placed him directly at the scene of the crime. Faced with the undeniable facts, the young man broke down, weeping openly. He confessed his involvement, but insisted he had not acted alone. Willie explained that in the summer of 2012, he was 16 and living under the care of his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory. According to Willie, his uncle had approached him and said they needed to travel up to Arlington to take care of a matter. Willie, feeling he had little choice but to follow his uncle's instructions, accompanied him on the 3-hour drive from Houston to Arlington on June 9th, 2012. When they arrived at the apartment complex, Bobby produced a key to the residence. Their instructions, Willie claimed, were to enter the empty apartment, thoroughly search it, and intentionally stage the scene to look like a random gang burglary. They scattered items, left the blue bandana, the pills, and the beer bottle. Willie admitted that he had smoked a small portion of a marijuana cigarette and left it in the living room, unaware that this small action would eventually lead detectives back to him. While they were still inside the apartment, Long and Hong returned home. A struggle ensued near the front door. Bobby grabbed the elderly husband, incapacitating him with a heavy object, while Willie tried to prevent Hong from escaping or calling for help. Once the couple was subdued, Bobby used duct tape to secure them, and together they moved the victims into the bedroom closet before fleeing the scene. When Detective Stewart asked why they had targeted the specific couple, Willie revealed a crucial piece of the puzzle. He stated that the entire plot had been organized and funded by a woman named Daphne Wright, a friend of his Uncle Bobby. My uncle met with Daphne at her office, Willie explained. She told him that some people owed her a large amount of money and refused to pay. She said if they did not pay what they owed, she wanted them taken care of permanently. She promised my uncle $10,000 to do it, and she was the one who provided the key to the apartment. Connecting the dots, armed with this groundbreaking information, investigators immediately focused their attention on Daphne Wright. They discovered that Daphne operated a highly popular spiritual advising business in the Houston area. She was a prominent figure in her local community, married with 3 daughters, and known for her strong, direct personality. She offered a variety of spiritual services, including rituals to bring prosperity, heal relationships, and remove spiritual blockages. When detectives reached out to Chow Tran to ask if he was familiar with Daphne Wright, they noticed a sudden shift in his demeanor rather than cooperating directly as he had in the past. Chow immediately referred all questions to his legal counsel. This reaction heightened the investigators' suspicions that there was a deeper connection between the family's finances, the spiritual advisor, and the tragedy. On December 16, 2015, detectives traveled to Katy, Texas, to arrest 52-year-old Bobby Guillory. Facing 2 counts of capital murder, Bobby initially remained silent, but eventually chose to cooperate after being presented with the details of his nephew's confession. Bobby expressed deep remorse, claiming he was in a state of extreme financial desperation at the time, having been laid off from his job and facing the prospect of homelessness. He confirmed that Daphne Wright had approached him with the offer of $10,000 to collect a debt or eliminate the debtors. According to Bobby, Chow Tran and Hong Lu had become deeply involved with Daphne's services. Over the course of a year, as the commercial sewing business continued to struggle, Chow had repeatedly turned to Daphne for spiritual interventions. Instead of paying for each service up front, Daphne had extended a substantial line of credit to the family. Over time, the outstanding balance ballooned to an astronomical sum, estimated between $250,000 and $280,000. When Daphne demanded payment, the family simply did not have the funds. Knowing that the family held substantial life insurance policies, a plan was conceived to utilize those policies to resolve the massive debt. Most shocking of all was Bobby's allegation regarding the key to the apartment. When Detective Stewart asked Bobby how Daphne had obtained the key to the residence, Bobby replied without hesitation, "She told me she got it directly from Chow Tran." The path to justice. On August 31st, 2016, investigators executed an arrest warrant for Daphne Wright at her Houston home, along with a comprehensive search warrant. Inside the residence, officers discovered detailed business ledgers. The records confirmed that Daphne was charging clients tens of thousands of dollars for individual spiritual ceremonies, with some ledger entries detailing outstanding balances of $30,000 and $40,000. Dubois, Daphne's husband Howard, was interviewed by detectives. He appeared completely shocked by the allegations, maintaining that he had absolutely no knowledge of his wife's business debts or any criminal activities, asserting that he believed her spiritual practice was entirely peaceful. Daphne herself refused to make any statements without her attorney present, maintaining a calm and detached composure throughout her processing. In order to build an airtight case against the primary coordinator of conspiracy, prosecutors made a strategic decision. They offered Chow Tran a specialized immunity agreement in exchange for his complete and truthful testimony regarding the financial arrangements and the interactions with Daphne Wright. During his formal depositions, Chow explained profound psychological influence Daphne held over his family. He described how they genuinely believed in her spiritual authority and feared that if they failed to pay their debts, she would place a devastating curse upon their children and grandchildren. Chow claimed that in a state of extreme distress, Hong Lu had suggested sacrificing herself so the family could collect the insurance money to pay Daphne and protect their descendants. According to Chow, Daphne had embraced the idea, but insisted that both elders must be included to ensure the payout was sufficient to cover the entire $280,000 debt. Although investigators remained deeply skeptical of Chow's claim that his mother-in-law had willingly participated in such a plan, his testimony was vital to securing a conviction against the mastermind who had hired the hitmen. The trial of Daphne Wright began on August 26, 2019. The courtroom was filled with community members, family supporters, and legal observers. Chow Tran took the stand, detailing the massive financial pressure, the constant demands from Daphne, and the delivery of the apartment key. The defense team vigorously cross-examined Chow, arguing that he was using Daphne as a scapegoat to protect himself and retain the remaining insurance funds, pointing out that there was no physical paperwork documenting the exact $280,000 debt. In September of 2019, after hours of careful deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Daphne Wright was found guilty of capital murder. Under Texas law, she received a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Both Bobby and Willie Guillory also faced severe legal consequences for their direct roles in the physical crime. A community restored. Though the legal proceedings brought a formal conclusion to the case, the true heart of the story lay in the healing of the Arlington community. The tragedy of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu served as a powerful lesson about the dangers of extreme desperation, while highlighting the enduring strength of community that rallied together in the face of sorrow. In the years following the trial, the local Vietnamese American community in Tarrant County established a supportive outreach program. The initiative was designed to assist newly arrived immigrant families with financial literacy, business counseling, and modern legal resources, ensuring that no one would ever feel so isolated or desperate as to fall prey to predatory practices. Detective Stewart, reflecting on his long career in the homicide unit, found a sense of peace in the resolution of the case. Justice as a way of finding its path, Stewart shared with his colleagues. It may take years and the road may be winding, but the truth eventually comes to light. The memory of Long and Hong lives on the strength of their children and the community that refuse to let them be forgotten. Under the warm Texas sun, the sewing shops of Arlington continue to hum with life, a testament to the enduring spirit of hard work, family devotion, and the hope of a brighter, safer tomorrow for all who seek their dreams on these welcoming shores. Chapter 1. A Quiet Morning in Texas. The summer sun in Arlington, Texas, always arrived with a heavy, golden warmth that blanketed the wide streets and quiet neighborhoods. On the morning of June 10, 2012, at exactly 7:29 in the morning, that peaceful silence was broken by a call to the Emergency Dispatch Center. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Chow Tran, a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant. His tone was a mixture of hesitation and rising anxiety. He was calling to request a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lee. The emergency operator, trained to find clarity in moments of panic, listened carefully as Chow struggled to spell out the names. He explained that his father-in-law was named Long, spelling it out letter by letter, and that his last name was Nguyen. He mentioned that his father-in-law was in his 70s. Chow explained that his family had grown deeply concerned. His son and his wife had gone to the apartment to check on the elderly couple. Through the window, they saw that things inside were in complete disarray, with items fallen to the floor. The window itself was open, which was highly unusual for a morning that was already turning hot. The responding officer, Officer Weller, was dispatched to the apartment complex. When he arrived, he noticed a large family gathering outside the apartment. In his 14 years of experience on the force, he knew that welfare checks rarely occurred this early in the morning, nor did they typically involve an entire family waiting anxiously on the pavement. The family members were too terrified to enter the residence themselves. Sensing that something was terribly wrong, Officer Weller entered the apartment, calling out to see if anyone was home. The living room was empty, as were the kitchen and the bathroom. The apartment was in a state of complete disarray, resembling a burglary. The only room left to inspect was the bedroom. Initially, a quick scan of the bedroom revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Officer Weller turned to leave, holding his flashlight. But as he turned, he noticed smudge marks on the wall next to a very small closet. A quiet instinct told him to pause. He hesitated for a moment, feeling a sudden reluctance to open the door. But his duty compelled him to check every corner. When he opened the closet door, he discovered the elderly couple, Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, inside. They were bound with duct tape around their limbs, heads, and mouths. There was no sign of life. The scene was incredibly grim, leaving the veteran officer in a state of shock. He walked out of the bedroom into the living room, unable to speak or use his radio immediately. After catching his breath, he requested a supervisor and a crime scene unit. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. When the homicide investigators arrived, they were deeply shaken by the severity of the crime. Detective Stewart, a veteran with 21 years in the homicide division, noted that the scene was one of the most violent he had ever witnessed. There were clear signs of a struggle. The walls showed marks where the victims had grabbed them as they were taken toward the back of the apartment. In the living room, furniture was overturned and compact discs were scattered across the floor, suggesting a robbery. However, the sheer level of violence seemed excessive for a simple burglary. The victims had suffered blunt force trauma to their heads, possibly inflicted by a tool like a hammer, though no weapon was found at the scene. The extensive use of duct tape, 25 feet wrapped around the wife's face and 10 feet around the husband's, indicated that the perpetrators intended to cause grave harm. The medical examiner later confirmed that the cause of death was suffocation. To the investigators, some of the evidence left behind seemed almost too deliberate. On the coffee table lay a plate of crushed prescription pills and a handmade cigarette. A light blue bandana was wrapped around a beer bottle, placed prominently as if it were a calling card. In Arlington, there were active local gangs known for using specific colors, and a light blue bandana was associated with certain groups. However, detective intuition suggested that the scene might have been staged to look like a gang-related robbery gone wrong. Plus. Evidence found initial investigative theory. Plus. Blue bandana attempted gang association. Crushed pills staged substance use. Scattered CDs staged robbery disarray. Plus. The detectives collected genetic samples from the handmade cigarette, took hair fibers, and processed the duct tape for fingerprints, hoping to find a direct link to the perpetrators. Chapter 3. The American Dream. Long Nguyen and Hong Lee had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000. They brought with them their children, their grandchildren, and a deep respect for their cultural traditions. Settling in Arlington, Texas, which hosted a vibrant and supportive Vietnamese community, they sought to build a prosperous legacy. The family established a commercial sewing business. Because Chow Tran spoke the best English, he became the face of the business, managing relations with contractors and clients. For nearly a decade, the business thrived, even securing a lucrative contract to manufacture garments for a major international entertainment company. However, by the year 2011, their fortunes shifted. The major contract was lost, and the business faced severe financial difficulties. In search of a solution, the family looked to traditional beliefs. In many traditional Asian cultures, it is common to seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor during times of significant hardship, such as financial distress or personal crisis, to help restore harmony and invite good fortune. Searching through a local Vietnamese newspaper, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Lee, found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in Houston. The advisor advertised services to remove negative curses and bring blessings of prosperity. Hoping to save their business, Chow traveled to Houston to meet with the advisor, a woman named Daphne Wright. She performed a traditional ritual, and the family returned home filled with renewed hope that their circumstances would soon improve. Chapter 4. The Shadow of Debt. As the months passed, the family's business did not recover. Instead of seeking alternative business strategies, Chow and his mother-in-law continued to rely heavily on Daphne's spiritual services. Over time, the cost of these rituals accumulated significantly. Because the family could not pay up front, Daphne extended them credit, and the total debt quickly ballooned to a sum between $250,000 and $280,000. Daphne Wright was not one to overlook an unpaid debt. When she demanded payment, the family simply did not have the funds. However, Daphne discovered that Chow and his wife were the beneficiaries of 2 substantial life insurance policies taken out on the elderly couple, totaling over $1 million. Behind the scenes, a dark plan began to take shape. Investigators would later learn that Daphne allegedly suggested using the life insurance policies as a way to settle the outstanding debt. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, detectives interviewed Chow Tran, who was acting as the family's spokesperson. He explained that the night before the discovery, the family had gathered to celebrate his father-in-law's birthday. The elderly couple had enjoyed the evening and were driven home by another relative around 10:30 in the evening. This was the last time they were seen alive. Chow cooperated fully with the initial questions, providing timelines and names of those present at the party. Genetic samples and fingerprints were gathered from Chow and other family members to compare against the evidence found at the apartment. When the results returned from the National Genetic Database, there was no match. The genetic profile from a handmade cigarette did not match anyone in the system, nor did it match any family members. Without a match, the case gradually went cold. For over 2 years, there was no new movement on the investigation, leaving the family and the community waiting for answers. Chapter 5. The Missing Piece. The breakthrough came in October of the year 2015. The National Database flagged a genetic match for the handmade cigarette left at the crime scene. The profile belonged to Willie Guillory, who had recently been convicted of felony involving the theft of a horse in Houston. In the year 2012, Willie had been only 16 years old. Because he was a minor with no prior felony convictions, his genetic profile had not been in the national database at the time of the murders. His recent conviction as an adult finally brought his information into the system. On October 17, 2015, investigators brought Willie Guillory in for questioning under a parole violation warrant. When presented with the scientific evidence linking him to the apartment in Arlington, Willie broke down and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He explained that his uncle, Bobby Guillory, had recruited him for a job in Arlington. On June 9, 2012, they made the 3-hour drive from Houston. According to Willie, his uncle had been given a key to the apartment to gain entry and stage a robbery. The plan was to throw things around to make it look like gang members did it. Willie explained during his confession, "We brought the bandana, the pills, and the beer bottle. I smoked part of the cigarette and left it there." Willie described how they waited for the couple to return. When the elderly couple entered, a struggle ensued, and they were ultimately bound and placed in the closet. When asked why they had targeted the specific couple, Willie pointed directly to a woman named Daphne Wright, a friend of his uncle. Chapter 6. Unraveling the Web. Following Willie's confession, detectives focused their efforts on locating Bobby Guillory and investigating Daphne Wright. On December 16, 2015, investigators arrested 52-year-old Bobby Guillory at his home in Katy, Texas, on 2 counts of capital murder. Initially reluctant to speak, Bobby confessed after learning that investigators had a warrant to obtain his genetic profile. He expressed deep regret and fear, explaining that he had never been in trouble with the law before. He had been laid off from his job and was facing severe financial distress when Daphne offered him $10,000 to carry out the deed. Bobby confirmed that Daphne was the driving force behind the plan, motivated by the desire to collect the substantial debt owed to her. He also claimed that Daphne had obtained the key to the apartment directly from Chow Tran. Detectives then traveled to Houston to interview 44-year-old Daphne Wright. She lived a quiet life with her husband and 3 daughters, presenting herself as a professional spiritual advisor. While she admitted to knowing Chow as a client and acknowledged hearing about the deaths of his in-laws, she refused to provide details regarding their financial transactions. A search warrant executed at her home revealed detailed ledgers of her spiritual business. The ledgers showed that she charged clients sums ranging from $10,000 to $40,000 for various spiritual services. Chapter 7, Justice and Reflection. To build a strong legal case against the primary instigator, prosecutors made a difficult decision. They offered Chow Tran immunity from prosecution in exchange for his full and truthful testimony regarding the financial arrangements and the planning of the events. With his attorney present, Chow detailed the immense psychological pressure the family felt under the burden of the debt. He claimed they feared spiritual consequences if they did not satisfy the outstanding balance. He also made the unusual claim that his mother-in-law had offered to sacrifice herself so the family could collect the insurance money to pay Daphne, a claim that investigators viewed with extreme skepticism. In August of the year 2019, the trial of Daphne Wright began. Chow took the stand, testifying about the heavy financial demands Daphne placed on the family and how he had left the apartment key under a doormat for the perpetrators. The defense argued that Chow was highly complicit in the scheme and was motivated by the insurance payout of $850,000, which went entirely to him. In September of the year 2019, the jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory also faced severe legal consequences for their roles in conspiracy. While the investigators expressed disappointment that Chow Tran did not face criminal charges due to the immunity agreement, the resolution of the case brought a sense of closure to the community. The trial highlighted the profound dangers of greed and the manipulation of trust. It served as a solemn reminder of the value of human life and the importance of seeking transparent, honest paths when facing life's greatest challenges. The story of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee began not in the sun-drenched, sprawling